Good morning. Good morning once again, and welcome to today's edition of Uncommon Awareness. If you're new to the program, we get new listeners all the time. I'm your host, Dr. Lorraine Hurley, and my website is drhurley.net. I encourage you to visit. Sign up for the free newsletter, which is coming out in just a few days. We also have other resources there for you, and it does help us. We are listener supported, so if there are products on the page that appeal to you, or ordering through my website is very helpful to me, and of course donations are always gratefully received. Today I have with me Nina Dalli Cardillo, and you're going to find that what Nina has to share is going to resonate very strongly with a lot of programming we've been doing recently, because she and I and many others are asking the question, hey, what's really going on? So she's here to discuss what she has researched and explored throughout her life with respect to human history and what she and I agree is contemporary insanity. Now, she's a philosopher, a researcher, an herbalist, and businesswoman, and her latest work is bigger than fiction. I'm not sure what she'll have to clue us in as to whether or not that website is ready to go. It is the title of a book she's writing. And throughout her life, she has experienced significant incongruence between what we are taught or told and what her direct observations of people, organizations, and life in general tell her. She's got a pretty extraordinary story of her personal life experience. Now, she's particularly focused her research on the Vedas and ancient history and teachings and what they suggest about the nature of reality. And I met her in Crestone this past summer. She's a friend of Sharon Rose, who joined me a few weeks ago to discuss her path as an artist, priestess, and film producer, including a film to be released in the next couple of months that I'm really excited about, called The Last Avatar. So expect to hear more from Sharon and about that in the coming weeks or months. You know, I've previewed it, and it is spectacular for a number of reasons. It's way outside the pale of what Hollywood is throwing at us. So Sharon thought I would be particularly interested in what Nina has to share about trauma-based mind control. Now, mind you, Nina can share a lot more than that, but we will get to that. And I am aware of programs such as MKUltra and very aware of secret government programs to test the malleability of human psyches and psychology, but I'm not an expert. And later this month, I will present a survivor of MKUltra who has come out with a book on her personal experience. And trauma-based mind control is strongly linked to what is called multiple personality disorder. But this is an extreme. With today's mainstream media and a constant play of trauma through TV and film, many more of us than would be willing to acknowledge have been subjected to immense control by the sheer magnitude of trauma we are exposed to on a daily basis. So we have a lot to cover. Hello, Nina.
Hi, Lorraine.
Hey, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. You're an extraordinarily interesting woman, Nina. But why don't we start with you? In other words, your path when you began to question the reality presented to you and the one you experienced directly, as well as how that path progressed. Do you mind giving us a little history of Nina?
Well, yes. Interesting enough, I really started as a child. I just looked at reality around me, and a lot of things did not make sense to me. I seem to have an awareness of history and mystical knowings that I couldn't even explain as a child. And then growing up in a Christian-based, I grew up in a Catholic Jewish area of the country in the East Coast. And I just had way too many questions that just was going beyond the adults that I was questioning. So by the time I was in my 17 or 18 years old, I started investigating Eastern philosophy because I felt like they seemed to talk about subject matters that were way beyond, the current Christian Western ideal on God and creation. So it was then that I got involved with the Srila Prabhupada's books. Srila Prabhupada wrote a series of books. He wrote the Bhagavad Gita. Basically, he translated Sanskrit texts from ancient India and put them into Western language, and then wrote a series of books to teach Westerners about India and the Vedic tradition. And his first book was the Bhagavad Gita, and that is the Bhagavad Gita is like India's Bible. It's like the Hindu Bible. And the Bhagavad Gita comes from a greater story called the Mahabharata, which is written as a historical text about India, but when you read it, you feel like you're reading something out of the myths. the mythology of the gods and what's going on between the gods. And then he went on to write several other books. And I was very interested in the philosophy, and the Eastern philosophy. It gave me so much more than the Western philosophy did. It explained what happened when we died, which at that time I didn't even know that I believed in reincarnation until I read that there was such a thing called reincarnation.
Right.
But I had always assumed that we didn't just have the one life. It just felt like there was so much more going on in the cosmos than what I had been taught up until that point. So I was very fascinated with the books and the philosophy around it. Once I joined the ashram in 1979, and I lived there for 7 years. And altogether, I would say I was involved with the movement for about 10 years. I became a teacher there, and I taught the children in one of their schools there. And I got to really know the stories because I wanted to relate these histories to the children in a way that wasn't at that adult philosophical level, but more for them to just learn the stories. And so I learned the stories. And the stories were always so fascinating. A lot of the stories are coming out of the Puranas, which is ancient Indian histories. And they were just fantastic stories of these god-like beings and their encounters with each other. And, they're riding around in flying machines. This is coming from scriptures that are several thousand years of age, and they're talking about flying machines.
Right.
So I was very, very curious about the stories and how they connected with us in this day and age. What was, when did it happen? Did it happen in the past? Is it something that's happening now? How is it? How do I take this sort of mythological, mystical, philosophical teachings and bring them into a contemporary mindset and a current, updated to our current way of looking at things? And so when I finally did leave the ashram, I did continue my investigations of that. And ever since then, no matter what subject I'm studying, whether it's ancient history or the occult or, the theories of hollow earth or some of the more far-out subjects that I'm into, I always go back to that. I always refer it back to the Vedas. I feel like there's a lot of it's very esoteric, but I feel like it contains such a storehouse of knowledge of what's really happened on this planet, more so than maybe other ancient texts that are out there. Somehow it's retained a lot of its integrity in the process.
Well, and you say basically in the conversations we've had and some information you sent over to me that, you were part of this organization, but it had a dark side too. So you were gaining a lot of and I love the way that you tell about you learn them as stories, because we had a woman in your area, Julie Moss Herrera, who's a professional storyteller, come on and relate how basically stories, especially as they're verbalized, are the best way that we learn and retain information. So I find that really interesting that you were able to gift that to children, right? They learned more from you by you being a storyteller and making sure they understood the stories. But you also talk about, I'm just going to quote you here. It was here that I learned the ways of the real world, witnessing this level of consciousness at work. I call this time living in the house of the dragon. I was given a spiritual choice there to choose the path of light and integrity or the path of shadow and manipulation. We're given this choice every moment, and how we choose determines our destiny. To this experience, I realized how corrupt any belief system can get. And I think what it felt to me like you were attempting to communicate is that we have, as seekers or as students of life, we have to be careful not to get trapped in dogma, because any systematic presentation of history or truth can become very dogmatic. Was that part of your experience?
Yes, oh yeah, definitely. And it was kind of a shock when I first entered the temple. I had studied Prabhupada's books for several years, and I was just sort of on my own with my family and chanting mantras and just really imbibing a lot of what I was being taught. And when I joined the temple, I was very naive. I was very young and naive, and like most religions, you go in with a lot of hope that this is the way. This is the answer. It's going to have everything for you. And immediately I was presented with personalities that were very strong and very patriarchal attitudes. And they, at that time, and this is in the early 80s, at that time they had some unscrupulous behavior. that they justified in the name of God, which happens in a lot of religions. And I saw that right off the bat. It was like, oh, you want me to go out and sell books and lie to people and try to get as much money from them and have this philosophy that it's all for God, so it's all okay. And unfortunately, I just wasn't built that way. I had a lot of integrity, and I didn't align with those kind of attitudes that wanted to be more manipulative, that had developed a spiritual ego around their philosophy, is what I think was really going on there.
Right. Well,
and then I also recognized that when you have Prabhupada came over in the 60s, and he started meeting these young men and women in New York, and he created this organization. But what happens really quickly is you get the level of people that want power and control. They're the ones who are motivated to get into positions of power and control. Right. And then usually it's the meek one that wants to I just want to be a spiritual person. I just want to be a monk and live in an ashram, and I don't want to deal with politics. Those people tend to stay in other areas of service that don't bring them into positions of power because they don't care enough to make it happen. And so what happens, you end up, and this happens in a lot of religions, and we can see that in the Catholic religion, you get the psychopaths are the ones running the show. And I didn't use that term then. That's a new term that I've really come to terms with in this current time that we're in. But at the time, you could feel it. You could just feel that energy of some of these people and this. I couldn't even put my fingers on it in the early days. It's only in leaving the movement and doing research that I've, come to grasp what I saw was happening there.
And I had shared with you that kind of began a whole different phase for me. Was I began to question what is evil. Like, in other words, it came upon me one day, the realization that psychopaths are running the world. So then I had to go back and say, if everything I've been taught about God and life has been a lie, then what is this thing called evil or the devil? What is it? And that began a whole another, that one question brought a whole expanded me into all kinds of areas of inquiry and research and individuals. But we are taking a break right now, Nina. When we come back, I do want to have you address what happened to you at the harmonic conversions, because this is another interesting piece of your history. But where she's going with this, listeners, really is into the area of trauma-based mind